There are some people in the world who are known for being conspiracy theorists. I pride myself on being a conspiracy realist. I am convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there are certain ways to see and understand where our society is going, or at least have some advance notice of the issues that we will face. Those of you who study with us regular know that one of those outlets for such information is the venerable National Geographic magazine, owned, of course, by the Grosvenor family, the descendants of Alexander Graham Bell. If you recall back to the early 90s, there was an article about this obscure country, Somalia, and how that country was collapsing. And sure enough, within a couple of years, the failed attempt at regime change resulted in the disaster which was memorialized by the movie Black Hawk Down. Several years later, as an obscure young state senator from the south side of Chicago was launching his campaign to the United States Senate and beyond, National Geographic ran a cover story about black pharaohs, perhaps just to get us ready for the idea. And so I was relieved this last spring, although it was a bit late as National Geographic goes, when my June issue arrived, and the cover story is Why We Lie. A salient issue. They should have published it a few months earlier. It's not political, it's the National Geographic. But lies, prevarications, fibs, falsehoods, these are a fitting topic for Kol Nidre evening. After all, the vows that we have asked to be annulled were things that we may have thought true when we said them, but the rabbis understand that shvorei nidarim, that the breaking of vows, constitutes a kind of retroactive lie. In fact, telling untruths, lying, deceiving is not unknown to us. Sometimes it happens in order to accomplish a goal. Rebecca, wanting her son Jacob to succeed his father and wanting to protect him from the wrath of Esau, goes through the falsehood of putting hairy skin on his arm, which, by the way, is a procedure known to shepherds for saving babies that have no mothers, and encourages her son to trick their father. That's not the only time in the Bible. We have in the book of Judges the story of Yael, a confederate of the chieftain Deborah, who, after a battle, when the Canaanite general Sisera was running from the field trying to escape after his army was defeated, Yael invites him into her tent, invites him to take a little refreshment, In terms that we would have said in Brooklyn, she slips him a Mickey. And when he falls asleep, she pegs him. If you want the details, read the story. Even Esther, right? Our great Jewish heroine, even Esther, gets Ahasuerus to turn against Haman, ultimately by setting up a situation where Ahasuerus thinks that she and Haman are, well, shall we say, mufki-pufki. Read the book or come to our senior seminar. Sometimes lies have national implications. When we look at the book of Joshua, God commanded that when the walls of Jericho fell, the spoils of Jericho would become public property. They would be dedicated to God's service and to the service of the people. And when Joshua's army attacked the next city, Ai, not quite as well known as Jericho, the initial assault failed, even though the army of the city of Ai was much weaker than the Hebrews' army, now Israelites' army. And Joshua asks why. And he says somebody did something wrong. And after an investigation, it turns out that a fellow by the name of Achan, a royal member of that tribe of Judah, took some of the stuff. And when Joshua confronted him, he said, "What did you do? You disobeyed God's rules." Well, Achan at least didn't lie. And he confessed immediately that there was a fancy garment that he saw among the spoils of the people that they had just wiped out. And he wanted it. It was gold and there was silver. And he took it and he hid it under the floor of his tent, under the earth. And so his deception caused the loss of a battle, caused the death and destruction of other Israelites that could have been avoided and was totally unnecessary. Sometimes we lie because of embarrassment. When the visitors, the angels, visit Abraham and Sarah, and one of them tells Sarah, who was of a certain age, that she was going to now be pregnant, Sarah hears this from behind the tent, and you remember what she did. She laughed. That's why the name is Yitzchak. She laughed. And when Abraham confronted her and said, "These messengers have brought us such good news, why did you laugh?" And what does Sarah say? She says, "I didn't laugh." She lies. Straight out lie. Perhaps she didn't believe the truth. Perhaps she thought that her guests were fakers. Perhaps she was embarrassed. Who knows? But even our mother Sarah was caught in a lie. There's another typology of lies. Sometimes we lie to get things that we want. Things that we don't think we could get if we told the truth or if we were dealing honestly. Sometimes we lie as a way of bargaining. We promise God that we'll do something if God will grant us some boon, health, long life, family happiness. And we make those nedarim, we make those vows. And how often do we forget them after God has granted our wish? If God has granted our wish. But even though we lie to get things from others, and we lie to bargain with God, perhaps the worst lies are the ones that we tell ourselves. When we convince ourselves that we are right when we really aren't, when we convince ourselves that we've righted some wrong that we've done to someone or something, and we haven't. When we tell ourselves that we're not going to do whatever we're doing wrong again until the next time, these are the lies we tell ourselves. And those are perhaps the most insidious of lies, because they don't just harm others, but they harm us, they harm our souls. But that brings us then to the question of why do we lie in the first place? Whether we're lying to people, lying to God, or lying to ourselves. And the answer partially lies in the story of King Saul, the famous first failed king of Israel, whose dynasty is taken away from him, whose sons die in battle on the same day that he dies, whose body is impaled on the walls of our sister city, Beit Shan, because he was not only unable to fulfill God's wishes, but he lied about it. Saul goes into battle against Amalek. We all know the story of Amalek, right? And Amalek attacked us as we left Egypt, attacked from the rear, which in the biblical world is a dastardly thing to do. Attack the sick and the tired. Attack the children. And God tells us to wipe out Amalek. Amalek is seen in our literature as the precursor to Haman. And Saul had the opportunity to wipe out the Amalekites. They come into battle against him, and all of the Amalekites are killed except for their king Agag. And God told Saul, listen, these people are so bad, you need to wipe them out. You need to wipe out their possessions. You need to get rid of their cattle. You're not to have any benefit from their evilness at all. And what does Saul do? Saul leaves King Agag alive. And it also gets reported to the prophet Samuel, the great prophet, who facilitated the transition from the tribal people of Israel to the kingdom. It's reported to Samuel that Saul didn't exactly do what he was supposed to do. And so Samuel approaches King Saul and he says, I heard that you did what you were supposed to do. And Saul lies to Samuel and he says, no, I did exactly what God commanded. In the meantime, on the other side of the hill are the herds that Saul kept from the Amalekites. And Samuel hears them. And Samuel confronts Saul and says, Uma kol hatzon hazeh ba'oznai, ukol habakar anochi shomea. If you destroy them all, then what is the bleating of sheep that I hear and the lowing of cattle that I hear? And Saul finally confesses that he disobeyed God's instructions. And not only that, he lied about it to the prophet, he lied about it to the people, and he lied about it to himself. Samuel must have been a pretty good therapist, because eventually he takes Saul aside, delivers the message that Saul is not going to be the beginning of a dynasty, that he's not going to be the head of a noble Israelite family that we still to this day look to for the coming of the Messiah. But that all has been taken away from them. And Samuel takes Saul aside, and he says to him, "Ich will zuk epis," because he spoke to him in Yiddish. He said, "I want to explain something to you." And then a wonderful, wonderful biblical line. Samuel says to Saul, "Halo im katonata ba'enecha." Isn't it that you were small in your own eyes? Isn't it that you were small in your own eyes? He's explaining to Saul and to us that when we lie to ourselves, to each other, to God, it's not because we're so tough, and it ain't because we're so smart. That we lie because we're trying to cover up our own sense of inadequacy. We're trying to hide the fact from everybody, including ourselves, that we really don't think we're good enough to face the world, to face the divine, to face ourselves. Halo im katanata ba'enecha. You're lying because of your inferior view of yourself. And then he goes on to say, but in reality, you are the king of Israel. How can you not trust yourself? How can you not obey God's law? Why do you try to steal this cattle? Why do you lie about it and hide and cover it up? You could stand there in your own right as a melech, as a king, tell the truth and show us how strong you are. Show us how strong you really are. And so Saul, one of the most spectacular failures in biblical and all of human political history, lies, fails, becomes despised, really because of his poor opinion of himself. But Judaism teaches us something different. As we read in last week's Rosh Hashanah service, it teaches us that we as human beings are little less than divine. We don't have ultimate power, but we have great power. We can't accomplish everything we want, but we can accomplish a lot. We can't do everything or be everything, but there's a lot that we can do. And if we then find that adequacy within ourselves and find the strength in the souls that God gave us, then we can avoid the mistake of King Saul. We can see ourselves as great, as potential. We don't have to lie. We can face ourselves and others and God honestly, with true contrition, with honest requests to be released from the vows we cannot fulfill. And so, on this night when we seek release from all the vows of the past year, when we pray for God's forgiveness and kindness and blessing for the year ahead, let's all work to a time when National Geographic doesn't give us this kind of a headline about why we all lie, by starting within ourselves, putting aside all falsehood, stopping our cover-ups with others, stopping to try to deceive God, and most importantly, being honest with ourselves. Gemar Chatima Tova.